Chapter 1. The Whispering Threshold. The air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from heat, humidity, and the cloying scent of decay. Salt water mingled with the smell of rotting vegetation, a perfume unique to the mangrove's edge. Sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy overhead, dappling the brackish water and slick, black mud in shifting patterns of pale green and shadow. Insects buzzed incessantly, a high-pitched whine that vibrated against the eardrums, occasionally punctuated by the splash of something unseen slipping into the water or the croak of a hidden frog. Ronan Cole adjusted the strap of his expensive audio recorder, shifting the weight on his shoulder. Perspiration beaded on his forehead, tracing paths through the layer of grime already accumulating there. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a muddy streak. Around him lay the tools of his trade, parabolic microphones nested in foam-lined cases, coils of shielded cable, delicate preamplifiers protected within waterproof containers. Each piece represented a significant investment, equipment designed to capture the purest sonic details of an environment. He surveyed the chaotic tangle of roots plunging into the dark water, the impenetrable wall of green marking the swamp proper. This place, the locals called it El Susurro, the Whisper, a name that hinted at folklore Ronan intended to dissect with scientific precision. His grant proposal spoke of bioacoustics, of unique vocalizations in isolated ecosystems. The local stories of mimicry and disembodied voices were, he assumed, exaggerations born of isolation and fear. Interesting data points, perhaps, but hardly empirical evidence. He checked the connections on his primary microphone, a sensitive Sennheiser shotgun mic mounted on a boom pole. Its furry windscreen looked absurdly out of place against the primal backdrop. "Almost ready," Ronan announced, mostly to himself. His voice sounded flat, absorbed by the dense air. A figure detached itself from the deeper shadows beneath a cluster of stilt roots. Javier Morno approached, his movements economical, born of long familiarity with the treacherous ground. He wore worn canvas trousers tucked into sturdy rubber boots coated in drying mud. His face, etched with lines deepened by sun and worry, held a permanent skepticism. He carried a sturdy machete, its blade dulled from use but still formidable. He stopped a few feet from Ronan's array of equipment, eyes flicking over the expensive gear without comment. "You are sure about this?" Javier asked. His voice was low, rough-edged. It wasn't the first time he had posed the question since Ronan hired him at the dusty cantina in the nearest town, 2 days' drive away. Ronan forced a confident smile. "Perfectly sure, Javi. This area is supposed to have incredible biodiversity, unique sound signatures. That's what the research indicates." He gestured vaguely towards the swamp. "That's what I'm here to document." Javier grunted, unconvinced. He scanned the oppressive wall of green, his gaze lingering. "The research does not tell you everything. This place—" He hesitated, searching for words Ronan might accept. "It changes people, plays tricks." "Tricks?" Ronan clipped the microphone securely onto the boom pole. "Animals mimic calls, Javi. Wind sounds like voices through the trees. It's all explainable phenomena. That's why I have this." He patted a recorder. to separate fact from fiction. Javier simply shook his head slowly, his expression unchanging. He turned as another, smaller figure emerged hesitantly from behind the gnarled trunk of a black mangrove. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, clutched a worn, spiral-bound sketchbook and a fistful of charcoal sticks. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted nervously between Ronan Javier and the forbidding entrance to the swamp. She wore clothes that were clean but slightly too large for her thin frame, a simple cotton dress and sandals inadequate for the terrain. This was Maya Sandoval. Javier had found her wandering alone near the dirt track leading to the swamp's edge 2 days prior, dazed and unresponsive. No sign of parents, no indication of where she came from. She hadn't spoken a word since he found her, communicating only through gestures or the surprisingly detailed, often unsettling drawings she created in her sketchbook. The authorities in the distant town had been notified, but bureaucracy moved slowly here. Javi, burdened by his own past losses connected to this place, couldn't bring himself to leave her at the understaffed regional office. Against his better judgment, she was now part of this expedition, at least until they returned. Ronan viewed her presence as an unfortunate complication, another variable in his carefully planned field work. "Keep her close, Javi," Ronan said, his tone betraying a slight edge of impatience. "We need to make some progress before dusk." Javier nodded curtly, placing a hand gently on Maya's shoulder. The girl flinched slightly at the contact but didn't pull away. She stared intently at Ronan's microphone, her head tilted as if listening to something beyond the range of human hearing. "The path is this way," Javier stated, turning towards a narrow break in the mangrove wall barely discernible amidst the tangle. "Stay on the solid ground. Watch for the roots, they trip you. And the mud. Some parts look solid, but they will swallow you whole." He hefted his machete. "I go first." Ronan shouldered his main recorder bag, picked up the boom pole and followed. Maya trailed behind Javier, her small sandals sinking slightly into the mud with each step. The transition was immediate. Crossing the threshold from the relatively open edge into the swamp proper felt like entering a different world. The air grew instantly cooler, damper. The incessant buzzing of insects seemed to intensify, closing in. The quality of light changed, becoming greener, murkier. Water dripped constantly from unseen leaves overhead, splashing onto the thick mud underfoot with irregular, plocking sounds. The path was less a trail and more a marginally less dense section of the forest. Javier moved with practiced ease, occasionally using his machete to clip a low-hanging vine or test the firmness of the ground ahead. Ronan struggled, his boots sinking deeper than Javi's, the boom pole snagging on roots and branches. He focused on keeping the microphone aimed forward, capturing the ambient soundscape. He activated the recording, watching the levels on the small display. The background hum of insects, the drip of water, distant bird calls, complex, layered. He strained his ears, listening through the high-quality headphones that isolated him further from his immediate surroundings. He heard the squelch of their footsteps, Javi's occasional grunt of effort, the whisper of leaves brushing against fabric. "Hear that?" Ronan murmured into the small microphone clipped to his collar, logging his observations. Distinct call, possibly an avian species endemic to this specific region. Note the unusual resonance. A bird call, clear and melodic, echoed briefly from somewhere deeper within the swamp. It sounded almost too perfect. Javier paused, turning slightly. His hand tightened on his machete. He scanned the dense foliage around them. "That is no bird I recognize," he said quietly, his voice tight. "Probably just a variation," Ronan replied dismissively, adjusting a dial on his recorder. "Mimicry is common, fascinating though." They pressed deeper. The mangroves crowded closer, their tangled roots forming bizarre, arching structures above the black water on either side of the narrow strip of land they walked. The air felt heavy, pressing in. Maya stumbled, and Javier caught her arm, steadying her. The girl didn't make a sound, but her eyes were fixed on a particular cluster of roots nearby, her expression unreadable. She pulled her sketchbook closer, her knuckles white. Ronan stopped to get a better angle with his microphone, sweeping it slowly across the soundscape. He captured the gurgle of water moving through the roots, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the pervasive insect hum. Then, another sound. Fainter this time, almost lost beneath the ambient noise. A soft cry like a baby, distant, muffled. Ronan lowered the headphones slightly, frowning. "Did you hear that, Javi?" Javier had frozen completely. His face was pale beneath his tan, his eyes wide, fixed on the impenetrable green ahead. He swallowed hard. "I hear nothing," he lied, his voice strained. "Sounded like an infant," Ronan persisted, rotating the microphone. "Could be an animal distress call, perhaps. A trapped mammal." The sound came again, a little clearer this time. A distinct, heart-wrenching sob that seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. Javier took a step back, pulling Maya with him. "We should not be here," he whispered, his earlier skepticism replaced by a raw, tangible fear. "This place, it knows we are here." Maya frantically flipped open her sketchbook. Her charcoal stick flew across the page, creating dark, sharp lines. She drew tangled roots, but within them, indistinct shapes began to form, open mouths, crying eyes, woven into the wood itself. Ronan watched Javi's reaction, a flicker of unease penetrating his scientific detachment. The guide's fear was palpable, genuine. He raised the headphones again, listening intently. The crying sound faded, replaced by the normal swamp ambience. He checked his recorder. The levels had peaked during the sound, registering it clearly. Explainable, surely. A trick of acoustics, perhaps, sound bouncing off the dense vegetation and water. Or an animal he wasn't familiar with. Yet Javi's terror, Maya's disturbing drawing. From somewhere to their left, deeper in the tangled maze, came a different sound. A clear, young voice, sharp with fear and desperation. "Javi, help me, Javi." It sounded exactly like Javier's sister, the one who had disappeared in this swamp a decade ago. Javier let out a choked gasp, his eyes snapping towards the source of the sound. His knuckles whitened on the machete handle. Logic warred with raw grief on his face. "No," he breathed, shaking his head fiercely. "It is not her, it is the swamp." But his feet shifted, his body angling towards the impossible voice calling his name from the suffocating green labyrinth. Maya tugged hard on his sleeve. her eyes wide with alarm, pointing insistently back the way they came. Ronan stood frozen, the microphone still aimed forward, capturing every nuance of the impossible call, the guide's ragged breathing, the child's silent panic. The objective data was undeniable. The sound waves were real, but the source felt utterly, terrifyingly wrong. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. The swamp wasn't just a place of unique sounds, it was listening, and it was beginning to speak. Chapter 2: Echoes in the Roots. The impossible voice hung in the humid air, sharp and clear, cutting through the background drone of insects. "Javi, help me, Javi." Javier Morno stood rigid, his breath caught in his throat. Every muscle in his body strained towards the sound. His knuckles were bone-white on the machete handle. Sweat dripped from his temples, tracing clean lines through the grime on his skin. His eyes, wide and haunted, stared into the dense green wall as if he could pierce it with sheer will and see his sister, 10 years younger, trapped within. It was her voice, the exact pitch, the pleading inflection he remembered with agonizing clarity. Ronan Cole kept the microphone aimed steadily, capturing the phenomenon. He saw Javi's reaction, the raw shock and disbelief warring with a desperate primal urge to respond. On his recorder's display, the sound waves peaked, clean and distinct. A perfect mimicry. Too perfect. The crying infant had been unsettling. This was targeted, personal, cruel. "Javi, don't," Ronan said, his voice low but firm, trying to cut through the guide's trance. "It's not real. It's the swamp. Acoustic anomaly, environmental vocalization." The scientific terms sounded hollow, inadequate even to his own ears. Javier didn't seem to hear him. He took one hesitant step off the narrow strip of solid ground, his boot sinking slightly into the black, sucking mud bordering the path. "Sophia," he whispered, the name a ragged exhalation. Maya tugged frantically at Javi's trousers leg. She shook her head violently, her small face contorted with fear. She pointed again, insistently, back the way they had come, towards the vague promise of the swamp's edge. Her other hand flew across her sketchbook page, charcoal scraping rapidly. She drew a monstrous, tangled root system, and within it, a crude stick figure representing Javi walking towards a dark shape with a wide, jagged mouth. "Javi," Ronan snapped louder this time. "Stop, think your sister. She's gone, this isn't her." The voice called again, closer now, laced with panic. "Javi, please, it's dark, I'm scared, help me." That broke him. With a strangled cry, Javier lurched forward, pulling free from Maya's grasp. He plunged off the path, ignoring Ronan's shout, ignoring the treacherous mud sucking at his boots. He raised his machete slightly, not as a weapon, but as if to clear a path to a desperate rescue. "Sophia, I'm coming." "Javi, wait," Ronan yelled, exasperated and alarmed. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. His protocol screamed at him to stay on the planned route, to maintain control of the recording environment. But letting the guide charge blindly into the unmapped swamp, possibly towards a genuine hazard masked by the mimicry, was unthinkable. He adjusted the recorder strap, tightened his grip on the boom pole, and lunged after Javier. "Damn it, Javi, hold up." He plunged into the thick mud, the cold ooze instantly soaking through his boots, gripping his ankles. Progress was slow, laborious. Ahead, Javier thrashed through low-hanging vines and sharp-edged palm fronds, driven by the phantom voice, which now seemed to retreat slightly, always just out of reach. "Sophia, where are you?" Javi cried, his voice thick with desperation. Ronan struggled to keep up, the heavy equipment bogging him down. He swept the microphone ahead, hopping to pinpoint the sound's origin. But it seemed omnidirectional, echoing uncannily through the root tunnels and dense foliage. He could hear Javi's ragged breathing, the frantic slosh of his movements, the tearing of vegetation. Then new sounds emerged, closer, subtler. A soft splashing to Ronan's right, as if someone were wading carefully through shallow water just out of sight. He instinctively swung the microphone towards it. Another splash, this time to his left, behind him. Footsteps. Soft, sucking sounds like bare feet pulling free from mud. He stopped, turning in a slow circle, straining his ears through the headphones. The voice of Sophia had faded momentarily. Now it was these smaller, closer sounds that dominated. A twig snapped nearby. A low chuckle, wet and gurgling, echoed from the base of a large mangrove. Maya caught up to him, her breath coming in short gasps. She hadn't followed Javi directly but had skirted the worst of the mud, moving with surprising agility through the tangled roots. She pointed urgently towards the base of the mangrove where the chuckle had originated. Her eyes were wide with terror. She held up her sketchbook. On the page, below the drawing of Javi walking into the root mouth, she had added small, hunched figures made of mud and sticks, half hidden among the roots, their drawn mouths open in silent mimicry. Ronan aimed the microphone directly at the spot Maya indicated. He heard it clearly now, a low, guttural clicking, a wet, shuffling sound. Something was moving there, concealed by the curtain of aerial roots and deep shadows. From ahead, Javi's voice rose in a frustrated shout. "Sophia, answer me." The phantom voice didn't reply. Instead, a different sound cut through the air, Ronan's own voice, synthesized, distorted, but recognizable. "Recording levels optimal." The fake Ronan voice echoed flatly from the direction Javi had gone. "Unique vocalization captured." Ronan felt a chill despite the suffocating heat. It was using his own logged observations against them, testing, mocking. "Javi," Ronan called, trying to project his real voice over the swamp's trickery. "Javi, that's not me, it's the swamp." A sudden splash and a sharp cry from ahead. Javi's voice, real this time, thick with sudden agony. "Ah, my leg." Ronan pushed forward again, ignoring the nearby shuffling sounds, ignoring the cold dread coiling in his stomach. Maya stayed close behind him, her small hand gripping the back of his shirt. They broke through a curtain of vines and saw Javi floundering waist-deep in a pool of black, stagnant water concealed beneath a layer of floating leaves. His face was contorted in pain. "Quicksand," Ronan shouted, approaching the edge cautiously. "No, roots," Javi gasped, struggling. "Something grabbed my leg, pulling me down." He hacked uselessly at the water with his machete. The blade splashed harmlessly. Ronan scanned the pool's surface, then aimed his microphone downwards, near Javi's submerged leg. The headphones filled with a low, creaking groan like stressed wood and a tight, rasping sound. Below the waterline, thick, rope-like mangrove roots, impossibly mobile, were wrapped tightly around Javi's ankle, anchoring him. More roots were slowly snaking up his leg. From the edge of the pool, near a cluster of arching prop roots, came that wet, gurgling chuckle again. Ronan spun, aiming the mic. Partially concealed by the roots, something small and vaguely humanoid stirred. Formed from dark mud, decaying leaves, and pale, grasping rootlets, it resembled a grotesque parody of a child. It had no discernible eyes, only dark hollows, but its misshapen head tilted towards them. A wide slit opened in the mud face, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like root splinters. It emitted a soft splashing sound, mimicking playful wadding, before another low chuckle escaped its crude mouth. A Mire Mocker. Maya whimpered, pressing herself against Ronan's back, hiding her face. Another Mire Mocker emerged slowly from the mud on the opposite side of the pool, its movements jerky, unnatural. It tapped rhythmically on a taut aerial root with a stick-like appendage, creating a hollow thump-thump-thump sound that resonated eerily. Ronan's mind raced. These creatures, these things, were they the source of the simpler sounds? Were they working in concert with the larger intelligence, the voice mimic? Were they merely opportunistic predators drawn by the struggle? Javi, hold on. Ronan scanned frantically for something to use as leverage, a sturdy branch, anything. He saw a thick, dead limb caught high in the canopy nearby, too high to reach easily. The Mire Mocker across the pool opened its slit mouth. It didn't chuckle this time. Instead, it emitted a perfect replica of the earlier sound, the soft, desperate cry of an infant. It echoed across the water, a calculated distraction. Javi groaned, pulled deeper as the roots tightened their grip. Water sloshed around his chest. Panic began to set in, overriding his pain. Get Maya out of here, he choked out, looking at Ronan. Now go. Ronan looked from Javi's desperate face to the terrified child clinging to him, then to the small, mud-and-stick horrors emerging from the swamp's embrace. The air filled with conflicting sounds, Javi's pained gasps, the infant cry from the Mire Mocker, the rhythmic tapping, the creak of the tightening roots below the water, the distant, incessant buzz of insects, and somewhere far off, the faint, renewed sound of a young girl calling her brother's name. His recorder captured it all, a symphony of terror. But the data offered no solution. He was trapped between the need to help Javi and the imperative to protect the child, surrounded by physical threats and auditory illusions designed to break them. The swamp wasn't just mimicking sounds, it was conducting them. Chapter 3: The Chorus of Mud. Panic constricted Ronan Cole's chest, cold and tight despite the oppressive heat. Javi gasped again, water sloshing near his chin as the roots relentlessly pulled him deeper into the black pool. The Mire Mocker across the water continued its obscene parody of an infant's cry, a sound designed to shred nerves. The other Mocker tapped rhythmically on the taut root, thump, 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 a maddening beat underscoring the horror. Maya pressed against Ronan's legs, her small body trembling. "The machete," Ronan yelled over the cacophony. "Javi, can you throw me the machete?" Javier, neck straining against the pull, twisted his upper body, water swirling around his shoulders. He held the heavy blade aloft for a precarious moment. His arm shook with pain and exertion. "Catch!" he choked out, flinging the machete towards the bank. It spun end over end, hitting the muddy verge with a wet thud several feet away from Ronan. Too far. The Mire Mocker, mimicking the baby, suddenly stopped crying. It tilted its eyeless head, and a new sound ripped through the air, a high-pitched electronic squeal like microphone feedback. It drilled into Ronan's ears through his headphones before he could rip them off. He winced, stumbling back a step. Maya cried out, clapping her hands over her ears. The feedback sound was a weapon, targeted, intelligent. Ronan tore the headphones from his head, letting them dangle around his neck. The raw sounds of the swamp rushed in, Javi's ragged breathing, the gurgle of the water, the mockers, wet movements, the incessant insect drone, unfiltered, overwhelming. The mocker that had thrown the feedback squeal shifted its attention. It began moving towards the bank, towards Ronan and Maya, its crude limbs propelling it through the shallows with surprising speed. Its slit mouth opened, emitting a low, guttural growl. Ronan glanced desperately at the machete, then at the approaching mocker, then back at Javi, whose eyes were wide with terror as the water reached his collarbone. No time. He had to act. His eyes fell on the boom pole lying discarded in the mud beside his recorder bag. Heavy-duty aluminum, extendable, not sharp but solid. He grabbed it, yanking it free from the sucking mud. He extended the sections rapidly, locking them into place. It wasn't a spear, but it was reach. The first mocker was now scrambling onto the bank, its muddy form surprisingly agile. It lunged towards Maya. Ronan reacted instantly, swinging the extended boom pole like a quarterstaff. He aimed low, connecting solidly with the creature's midsection. The impact yielded a sickening, wet thwack. The mocker flew backwards, landing with a splash in the shallow water near the edge. It didn't seem damaged, more surprised. It let out a series of angry clicks and began pulling itself back onto the mud, leaving sticky trails. Ronan spared a glance for Javi. The guide was struggling weakly, his face pale, eyes rolling back slightly. He was losing consciousness or succumbing to the inevitable pull. "Javi, stay with me," Ronan shouted, his voice hoarse. The second mocker, the one tapping, abruptly stopped its rhythm. It turned its eyeless face towards Ronan. From its mouth came a perfect imitation of Ronan's own voice, pitched slightly higher, frantic. "The roots! Cut the roots! Hurry!" Another trick, trying to make him focus solely on Javi perhaps, while the first mocker attacked again. Ronan ignored the mimicry. He stepped cautiously towards the water's edge near Javi, using the boom pole to test the ground in front of him. Solid here. He knelt, extending the pole towards Javi's submerged leg. "Can you grab this? Try to brace yourself." Javi's hand weakly groped for the pole, fingers splashing in the water before finding and gripping the metal tube. "Pulling," he gasped. Ronan planted his feet, leaning back, trying to use his weight as counter-leverage against the relentless roots. He felt the strain immediately. The roots held firm, unyielding. It was like trying to pull a tree stump anchored in concrete. He felt a slight give, then nothing. The roots seemed to tighten their grip in response. Behind him, the first mocker was back on the bank. It skittered sideways, trying to circle around him towards Maya. Maya, seeing it approach, reacted with surprising speed. She scooped up a handful of thick black mud and hurled it directly at the mocker's head. It struck the eyeless face with a splat. The creature paused, disoriented, clawing at the mud, obscuring its facial sensors or openings. "Good, Maya," Ronan grunted, straining against the pole, sweat stinging his eyes. "Keep distracting it." The mocker, mimicking Ronan's voice, changed its tactic. "Leave him," the false Ronan voice pleaded. "He's gone. Save the girl. Save yourself." Ronan gritted his teeth, ignoring the psychological assault. He had to free Javi. He looked down at the water swirling around the guide's leg. He could see the thick, dark roots clearly now, pulsing faintly like constricted pythons. They seemed embedded, almost fused with Javi's flesh. Simple pulling wasn't working. They needed to be cut. He glanced again at the machete lying tantalizingly close. If he let go of the boom pole to get it, Javi might slip under instantly. The mocker Maya had hit screeched, a sound like tearing fabric, and lunged again, faster this time. Maya scrambled backwards, tripping over a root and falling. The mocker was almost upon her. Without thinking, Ronan released the boom pole. Javi groaned as the support vanished. Ronan snatched the microphone from his own collar where he'd clipped it earlier, a small, sturdy lavalier mic on a thin but strong cable. He whirled, swinging the mic end of the cable like a tiny bolus. He didn't aim for the mocker. He aimed for a low-hanging, thorny vine just above it. The weighted mic head whipped around the vine, the cable tangling securely. Ronan yanked hard. The thorny vine ripped downwards, raining sharp thorns and leaves directly onto the Mire mocker. The creature shrieked again, a horrible wet tearing sound, and stumbled back, momentarily entangled and confused by the sudden assault from above. Ronan didn't wait. He scrambled the few feet to the machete, scooped it up, the handle wet and slick with mud, and turned back to the pool. Javi's head was barely above water now, his eyes closed, lips blue. Ronan plunged into the icy water beside Javi, the cold shock taking his breath away. The mud and unseen debris on the pool bottom sucked at his own boots. He reached down, feeling for the roots coiled around Javi's leg. They felt unnaturally hard, like petrified wood, yet sickeningly pliant, alive. He raised the machete, preparing to hack at the nearest root. But as the blade descended, the second mocker, the mimic, let out an ear-splitting shriek, not a copy, but a raw, piercing alarm call. Simultaneously, the roots around Javi's leg pulsed violently, yanking him downwards with sudden, immense force. Javi's head went under. Bubbles erupted on the surface. Ronan drove the machete downwards into the black water where the roots were thickest. He felt a jarring impact, a dull thud as the blade bit into something incredibly dense. He hacked again, frantically, blindly, feeling resistance, then a slight give. He dropped the machete, grabbed Javi under the arms, and heaved upwards with every ounce of strength he possessed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing cartilage, Javi's leg came free. Ronan stumbled backwards, dragging the guide's dead weight towards the bank, slipping and sliding in the mud. Javi wasn't breathing. His face was slack, tinged blue-gray. Ronan hauled him onto the relative solidity of the muddy verge, collapsing beside him. He immediately tilted Javi's head back, checked his airway, clogged with mud and water. Ronan turned him onto his side, pressing firmly on his back. Water and bile streamed from Javi's mouth. Ronan cleared his airway as best he could with shaking fingers. He repositioned Javi, pinched his nose, and began rescue breaths, forcing air into the guide's lungs. He alternated with chest compressions, counting aloud, his voice ragged. 1, 2, 3. Maya crept closer, her eyes fixed on Javi's still face. The two Mire Mockers watched from the edge of the pool, silent now, their eyeless faces turned towards the resuscitation effort. They made no move to attack, merely observed, their muddy forms unnervingly still. The rhythmic tapping, the infant cries, the mimicry all ceased. The only sounds were Ronan's desperate counting, the squelch of his hands on Javi's chest, and the pervasive, watching silence of the swamp itself. It felt heavier, more menacing than the noise. After what felt like an eternity, Javi gave a violent cough, spewing more water. His eyelids fluttered. He gasped, drawing a ragged, painful breath, then another. His eyes opened, unfocused, filled with confusion and pain. Relief washed over Ronan, so potent it left him weak. He sat back, breathing heavily, covered in mud and Javi's expelled swamp water. "Javi, you with me?" Javier coughed again, grimacing. He touched his leg gingerly. His trouser leg was shredded below the knee, revealing deep, bleeding gouges where the roots had dug in. The flesh looked bruised, torn. "Think so," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "The roots." Ronan followed Javi's gaze. The roots that had held him were retracting slowly back into the murky depths of the pool, leaving oily swirls on the surface. But something else caught Ronan's eye. Where he had hacked with the machete, a thick, pale, almost colorless fluid oozed from the severed root ends, mixing sluggishly with the black water. It wasn't sap. It looked disturbingly like lymph or plasma. Before he could process this, Maya tugged sharply on his sleeve again. She wasn't looking at Javi or the pool. She was pointing deeper into the swamp, past the now silent Mire Mockers. Her face was pale, her eyes stretched wide not just with fear but with utter disbelief. Ronan turned his head, following her gesture. The two Mockers seemed to shrink back slightly, melting into the mud at the pool's edge as if trying to disappear. From the dense green labyrinth ahead, a new sound emerged. It wasn't mimicry. It wasn't an animal call or an environmental noise. It was a low, resonant hum, almost below the threshold of hearing, yet it vibrated through the mud, up through Ronan's boots, into his bones. Accompanying the hum was a rhythmic, wet, dragging sound. Something heavy was moving towards them, pulling itself through the sodden terrain. And woven into the deep hum, almost masked by it, was another layer of sound, countless, tiny, wet clicks, like a million chitinous insects moving as one. The Mire Mockers had been a localized threat, a diversion. This felt different. This felt like the swamp itself was stirring, focusing its attention. The true performance was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Resonant Mass. The deep hum intensified, pressing against Ronan's ears, vibrating through the soles of his mud-caked boots. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, a physical presence in the air. The rhythmic dragging grew louder, accompanied by that unsettling chorus of tiny, wet clicks. Whatever was coming, it was large and it wasn't moving quickly, but its approach felt inexorable, like the turning of a glacier. Ronan scrambled to his feet, hauling Javi into a sitting position against the base of a thick mangrove trunk. The guide groaned, clutching his bleeding leg. His face was pale and clammy. "What is that?" Javi breathed, his eyes searching the dense foliage from which the sound emanated. Ronan didn't have an answer. He retrieved his recorder, checking the levels instinctively. The input spiked erratically with the low-frequency hum, overloading the sensitive microphones. This sound wasn't meant to be simply heard. It was meant to be felt, to disorient. He switched off the main recording function, useless in this sonic overload, but kept the headphones nearby, hopping the directional mic might still isolate specific elements. Maya tugged harder on his sleeve, her eyes fixed on the approaching sound. She opened her sketchbook to a fresh page and began drawing with fierce concentration. Not figures this time, but patterns. Dense, swirling spirals for the deep hum, sharp, jagged lines radiating outwards for the dragging noise, and countless tiny dots clustered together for the clicking. In the center of the page, she drew a large, amorphous shape, pulsing with dark energy, pulling the other sound patterns towards it. "We have to move," Ronan said, his voice tight. "Now can you walk?" Javi gritted his teeth and tried to push himself up, leaning heavily on Ronan. He put weight on his injured leg and cried out, nearly collapsing. "No, I cannot walk on this. Go, take the girl, get out." "We're not leaving you," Ronan stated, scanning their surroundings desperately. Retreat back the way they came seemed impossible. They were disoriented, and the Mire Mockers, though currently quiescent, were likely still nearby. Going deeper seemed suicidal, heading directly towards the source of the new threat. Their options were dwindling rapidly. The dragging sound was closer now. Ronan could hear the squelch of mud, the snapping of smaller roots and branches being pushed aside or broken. He risked pointing the shotgun mic towards the sound, lifting one headphone cup to his ear. Beneath the oppressive hum, he could isolate the clicking more clearly. It wasn't insects. It sounded like teeth. Thousands of tiny, chattering teeth. He spotted a potential route not forwards or backwards but sideways. A narrow ridge of slightly higher ground, densely packed with smaller mangroves and ferns, seemed to lead away from the pool and parallel to the direction of the approaching sound. It offered more cover, but the footing looked precarious. "This way," Ronan decided, pointing. "Lean on me, Javi. We'll move slow." Supporting Javi's weight, Ronan half-carried, half-dragged the injured guide towards the ridge. Maya scrambled ahead, her small form navigating the tangled roots with an agility Ronan envied. Every step was agony for Javi, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ronan strained under the weight, his own muscles burning. Progress was painfully slow. The humming entity broke through the tree line behind them, emerging into the small clearing by the pool. Ronan risked a glance back. His breath hitched. It was horrifying. A massive, vaguely slug-like conglomeration of mud, slime, decaying vegetation, and thick, interwoven mangrove roots, easily 10 feet high and twice as wide. It didn't have a defined shape, constantly shifting and oozing as it moved. Pale, fleshy roots pulsed rhythmically within the dark mass, generating the deep, subsonic hum. Its underside churned, countless fibrous tendrils gripping and releasing the mud, producing the dragging sound. And embedded all over its surface like grotesque jewels were hundreds upon hundreds of Mire Mockers, fused partially into the central mass. Their small, clicking mouths opened and closed constantly, creating the chilling chorus. Some still bore the marks of Ronan's earlier attacks, dents from the boom pole, scratches from the thorny vine. They were part of this larger entity, a mobile hive. The Resonant Mass. The mass slid ponderously towards the pool, its eyeless mocker components turning towards their location. It seemed to sense them, drawn by their presence or perhaps by the lingering scent of Javi's blood in the water. "Move faster," Ronan urged, practically dragging Javi up onto the ridge. The ground here was slightly firmer but dangerously uneven, a lattice of interwoven roots covered by a thin layer of soil and leaf litter. Maya navigated it carefully, testing each step. Ronan, burdened by Javi, struggled, his boots constantly slipping or catching. The resonant mass reached the edge of the pool where Javi had been trapped. It paused, the humming deepening, resonating through the air. Several mockers detached themselves from the main body, slipping into the black water and disappearing beneath the surface. Retrieving something, analyzing the scene. Then the acoustic assault shifted again. The deep hum lessened slightly, but the clicks intensified, becoming louder, sharper. Simultaneously, a new sound emerged from the mass, generated by the dozens of mocker mouths working in unison. A perfect replica of a search and rescue helicopter's rotor blades, growing steadily louder, seeming to approach from overhead. "A chopper," Javi gasped, hope flaring desperately in his eyes despite the pain. He craned his neck, trying to see through the dense canopy. "They found us." "No," Ronan yelled, pulling Javi onwards along the ridge. "It's the mass. It's mimicking. Don't listen." But the sound was incredibly convincing, the rhythmic whump-whump-whump of blades, the whine of a turbine. It seemed to circle overhead just beyond the leaves. Hope was a powerful lure. Javi instinctively stopped, straining to hear, to spot it. This hesitation cost them precious seconds. Maya frantically tugged at Ronan's shirt, pointing ahead along the ridge. She held up her sketchbook. She had drawn the ridge path. Ahead it split. One fork looked slightly wider, clearer. The other was narrower, choked with thorny vines. The helicopter sound seemed to be strongest coming from the direction of the clearer path. Maya had drawn a large X over the clear path and was pointing vehemently towards the thorny, narrower option. Ronan understood. The swamp through the mass was using sound to guide them towards a trap. "The other way, Javi," Ronan insisted, pulling the guide towards the narrower, thorn-choked path Maya indicated. "The chopper isn't real." Javi resisted for a moment, torn between the auditory promise of rescue and Ronan's desperate warning. The helicopter sound grew louder, seemingly hovering directly above the clearer path. Then, from that direction, came another sound, a distorted, amplified version of Ronan's voice. "This way. Path is clear. Move." That decided it for Javi. He recognized the manipulation now. With a grunt of pain and resignation, he allowed Ronan to steer him towards the thorny trail. They plunged into the dense undergrowth, thorns tearing at their clothes and skin. Progress became even slower, a painful battle against the vegetation. Behind them, the resonant mass began to move again, slowly turning, its collective mocker faces tracking their new direction. It started to haul its immense, clicking bulk onto the ridge, beginning to follow. The helicopter sound faded, replaced once more by the oppressive hum and the clicking chorus. They struggled onwards, forcing their way through the thorns. Ronan's arms burned from supporting Javi and hacking futilely at the thickest vines with the machete. Javi was fatting, his face slick with sweat, his breathing shallow. Maya stayed just ahead, occasionally pausing to point out a hidden root or a patch of unstable ground. Then the swamp played another card. A voice echoed from deeper within the thorny tangle ahead of them, faint but distinct. A woman's voice, calm and reassuring. "Hello, is someone there? We saw your light. We have a camp just ahead. Follow my voice." Ronan froze. It wasn't a voice he recognized. It didn't sound like Sophia. It sounded ordinary, plausible. Could there actually be other people here? Lost hikers, researchers? Javi looked at Ronan, his eyes questioning. Hope, however irrational, flickered again. Maya shook her head frantically. She pointed at her sketchbook. Flipping back to the page showing the resonant mass, she tapped the amorphous shape, then pointed towards the direction of the new voice, then drew jagged lines like static or interference. Around the drawing of the mass, she seemed to be indicating the mass was the source, that it could project sounds, perhaps even complex speech, over distances. "No," Ronan said firmly, his voice low. "Keep moving, it's another trick." They pushed onward, ignoring the calm, inviting voice that continued to call from the thorns ahead, promising safety, warmth, rescue. The contrast between the soothing tone and their desperate, painful struggle was a psychological torture. The ridge began to slope downwards. The ground became wetter, muddier. Ahead, the thorny thicket seemed to thin slightly, revealing a small clearing dominated by a cluster of colossal banyan trees, their aerial roots forming thick, pillar-like structures that descended from high branches into the mud below, creating a shadowed space beneath the main canopy. It looked like a potential shelter, a place to rest, to tend to Javi's leg. But as they approached the edge of the clearing, the welcoming voice cut off abruptly. The deep hum from the pursuing resonant mass seemed to falter for a moment. A different sound arose from the shadowed space beneath the banyan trees, a soft, rhythmic creaking, like wood rubbing against wood, and a low, mournful moan that seemed to seep from the very earth. Maya stopped dead, refusing to go further. She pointed towards the banyan roots, her hand trembling. Her sketchbook fell open from her nerveless fingers. The last page she'd been working on showed the pillar-like roots of the banyan trees, but woven into the roots, hanging amongst them like grotesque fruit, were crude, human-shaped effigies made of woven vines and mangrove wood. Their drawn mouths were open in silent screams. The clearing wasn't a sanctuary. It was something else, something worse. And the resonant mass, relentlessly humming and clicking, was still closing in behind them. They were trapped between the pursuing horror and the unknown dread waiting beneath the trees. Chapter 5: The Groaning Wood. The air grew still, caught between the advancing hum of the resonant mass and the low, mournful groan emanating from the banyan clearing. Sweat dripped into Ronan's eyes, stinging. He tightened his grip on Javi, whose breathing was shallow, ragged. Maya stood frozen at the edge of the thorny thicket, her dropped sketchbook lying open in the mud, displaying the chilling drawing of the root-woven figures hanging within the trees. Her small hand remained outstretched, pointing towards the banyan grove, her face a mask of stark terror. Behind them, the resonant mass pushed through the last of the intervening vegetation onto the ridge. The deep hum pulsed, seeming to vibrate the very ground beneath their feet. The myriad of clicking sounds from the embedded mockers intensified, a dry, chattering anticipation. The huge, amorphous creature oozed forward, consuming the narrow path, leaving a trail of crushed foliage and slime in its wake. It was slow, but relentless. They had maybe a minute, perhaps less, before it reached them. Ronan looked from the approaching horror to the shadowed clearing ahead. The banyan grove seemed to absorb the ambient light, the thick, pillar-like aerial roots creating deep pockets of gloom beneath the dense canopy. The rhythmic creaking sound continued, like stressed timbers on an old ship, accompanied by that soul-chilling moan. It wasn't a single voice, Ronan realized, but a layered sound, multiple low groans overlapping, rising and falling in a sickening cadence. "We can't stay here," Ronan stated, his voice strained. He glanced at Javi. "The clearing, it's our only cover." Javi squinted towards the banyans, his pain-clouded eyes trying to penetrate the gloom. "Those things, Maya's drawing." He shuddered, a tremor running through his body that had nothing to do with his injury. "I do not like that sound, Ronan." "I don't either," Ronan admitted grimly. "But that," he nodded back towards the advancing mass, "is certain death. In there," he gestured towards the banyans, "maybe we find shelter, maybe we can hide." Maya whimpered, shaking her head fiercely. She tugged at Ronan's trousers, pulling him away from the clearing's edge. She pointed again at her drawing, tapping frantically at the hanging effigies. Ronan knelt beside her, keeping one eye on the approaching mass. "What is it, Maya? What are they?" Maya picked up a piece of charcoal that had fallen from her book. On the muddy ground beside her drawing, she quickly sketched one of the pillar-like banyan roots. Then she drew lines radiating from the root, connecting to the hanging effigy shape. She drew jagged lines around the effigy's open mouth, indicating the source of the groaning sound. Then, most disturbingly, she drew stick figures, representing them walking towards the root, and then added more lines showing the root itself reaching out towards the figures. Ronan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The roots weren't just anchors. The effigies weren't just decorations. The groaning wasn't just ambient sound. According to Maya's frantic sketch, the trees themselves, or whatever inhabited them, were the threat, using the effigies, using the sound to lure victims. The resonant mass was dangerously close now, maybe 30 feet away. The humming vibrated Ronan's teeth. The clicking was a physical wave washing over them. Suddenly, the groaning from the banyan grove intensified. The pitch shifted, becoming higher, sharper, closer to a human cry of agony. And interwoven with it, a new sound, a clear, feminine voice filled with pain. "Javi, Javi, is that you? Help me, please." It was Sophia's voice again. Not the desperate plea from before, but a weak, suffering whisper, seemingly emanating directly from the shadowed depths beneath the banyan trees. Javi gasped, his head snapping up. His eyes, moments before glazed with pain, now burned with a mixture of anguish and desperate hope. Sophia. Javi, no. Ronan grabbed his arm. It's the trees. It's the same trick as before, just a different source. But it sounds. She sounds hurt, Javi pleaded, his resistance fueled by years of guilt and grief. He tried to pull towards the clearing, towards the voice. Maybe she is trapped in there. She's not in there, Javi. Ronan insisted, struggling to hold him back while keeping Maya close. It's the swamp. It knows what you want to hear. The resonant mass paused its advance, its mocker faces tilting as if listening, observing the effect of the banyan grove's mimicry. The humming softened slightly, allowing Sophia's pained voice to carry more clearly. Cold, so cold, Javi. Help. Ronan made a split-second decision. He couldn't fight the mass, he couldn't trust the clearing. But maybe they could use the swamp's own tactics against it. He still had the lavalier microphone he'd used to tangle the mocker earlier, its cable strong. He looked up. High above the ridge, caught between branches, was the thick, dead limb he'd noticed earlier near the pool. It was partially obscured, but potentially reachable. Maya, Ronan said urgently, pointing upwards. The big branch, can you climb? Maya looked up, assessing the tangle of vines and smaller branches leading towards the dead limb. She hesitated for only a moment, then nodded, her small face determined. She tucked her charcoal stick into a pocket and began scrambling up the nearest thick vine, moving with the same surprising agility she'd shown earlier. "What are you doing?" Javi asked, confused, distracted momentarily from Sophia's weakening cries. "Creating a diversion. Maybe," Ronan replied, pulling the lavalier mic cable taut. He needed to get the mic head, the heaviest part, up to Maya. "Grab this, Javi." He looped the cable loosely around Javi's good arm. "Hold it steady." Ronan looked back at the resonant mass. It remained stationary, seemingly content to let the banyan grove do its work. Or perhaps it was coordinating the attack. He quickly reconnected the lavalier mic to his portable recorder, keeping the main unit strapped to himself. He fumbled with the settings, switching from recording to output, cranking the gain as high as it would go. He selected a sound file, not a recording from the swamp, but a test tone he always kept loaded. A piercing, high-frequency sine wave used for calibrating equipment. Maya had climbed halfway to the dead limb. She looked down, waiting. "Now," Ronan shouted. He fed slack into the cable as Javi carefully tossed the mic end upwards. Maya stretched, catching the small microphone head deftly. She continued climbing, pulling the cable up with her, until she reached the thick, dead branch. She quickly looped the cable around it several times, securing the mic head near the wood. "Okay, Maya, get down fast," Ronan yelled. As Maya scrambled back down the vines, Ronan hit play on the recorder. An ear-splitting electronic screech erupted from the small microphone dangling high above the ridge, amplified by the recorder's output gain. The pure, high-frequency tone sliced through the air, overriding the groans from the banyan, the pained whispers of Sophia, and even the deep hum of the resonant mass. The effect was immediate. The resonant mass recoiled, its amorphous body shuddering. The clicking from the embedded mockers became frantic, disorganized. The creature seemed physically pained or disoriented by the pure, unnatural frequency. Several mockers detached from the main body and fell writhing into the mud below. The deep hum faltered, becoming uneven. The groaning from the banyan grove also stopped abruptly. The painful whispers of Sophia cut off mid-plea. A deep silence fell over the clearing itself, a silence that felt more menacing than the previous sounds. Maya dropped the last few feet to the ground beside Ronan, just as the cable securing the mic slipped from the branch under its own slight weight. The microphone tumbled down, bouncing off roots before landing in the mud near Ronan's feet, the piercing screech cutting out as the connection likely jarred loose. But it had worked. The resonant mass was stalled, confused. The banyan grove was silent. They had a window. Now, Javi, Ronan grabbed the guide again. Move while it's disoriented. Ignoring the silent, watchful clearing, Ronan steered Javi along the narrow ridge, moving parallel to the banyan grove but keeping as much distance as possible. They half ran, half stumbled, Javi gritting his teeth against the searing pain in his leg, Ronan pushing him onward. Maya stayed close, her eyes darting between the stunned resonant mass behind them and the unnervingly silent trees to their right. They passed the edge of the banyan clearing. Ronan risked a glance into the shadows beneath the canopy. He saw them clearly now, the effigies. Crude, human-sized figures woven from mangrove roots and vines, lashed tightly to the thick aerial roots of the banyans. There were at least a dozen, hanging at different heights, their woven limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Their heads were simple knots of fiber, but gaping holes were torn where mouths should be. They swayed gently in the still air, producing that faint, rhythmic creaking sound. The earlier moaning seemed to have emanated directly from those dark, gaping mouths. One effigy, hanging lower than the others, caught his eye. Its shape was disturbingly familiar, the proportions, the slight tilt of the head knot. It strongly resembled the figure Maya had drawn representing Javi walking towards the root mouth earlier. Had the swamp created it specifically for him? Or was it an older victim, coincidentally similar? As they moved past the grove, the silence from within broke, not with moaning or mimicry, but with a dry, rustling sound, the sound of the effigies shifting. Ronan looked back, horrified. The woven figures were slowly turning on their bindings, their empty mouths aligning, tracking their movement along the ridge. The creaking intensified. Behind them, the resonant mass began to stir again. The deep hum resumed, steadier this time, angrier. The clicking intensified. It started to move, picking up speed, its bulk sliding relentlessly along the path they had just vacated. They were exposed again on the narrow ridge, with the recovering mass behind them and the watchful, groaning effigies just yards away in the banyan grove. The path ahead seemed to continue, winding deeper into the swamp, but its destination was unknown. They had bought moments, nothing more. The swamp had weathered the sonic assault and was closing in again, seemingly angrier than before. Chapter 6, Cacophony Descent. Move, keep moving, Ronan urged, his voice raw. He pushed Javi forward along the precarious ridge path, glancing back repeatedly at the resonant mass lumbering in pursuit. The creature had regained its momentum, the deep hum settling back into a steady, menacing pulse that vibrated through the very air they breathed. The clicking chorus of its embedded mockers was sharper now, angrier. To their right, the banyan grove remained a pocket of unnerving silence, but the woven effigies hanging amongst the aerial roots continued their slow, deliberate turn, tracking their progress. The creaking of their vine and root bodies was the only sound from that direction, a dry counterpoint to the wet, heavy sounds of the pursuing mass. The ridge path ahead narrowed further, winding between thick clusters of mangrove knees and gnarled roots that clawed at their clothes. The ground became softer, spongier, threatening to give way under Javi's uneven weight. Ronan's muscles screamed in protest, supporting the injured guide while trying to navigate the treacherous footing. Maya scrambled ahead, her usual agility hampered by the growing fear evident in her tense shoulders and wide eyes. She kept glancing back, not just at the mass, but also towards the sky, as if expecting another sonic assault from above. The swamp seemed to be holding its breath, the interval of relative quiet stretching unnervingly long after the chaos of the high-frequency tone. Ronan knew it wouldn't last. The silence itself felt like a tactic, heightening their anxiety, making every natural swamp sound the drip of water, the rustle of unseen leaves, the croak of a distant frog seem like a potential precursor to a new horror. He risked adjusting the headphones again, cautiously turning the volume low, sweeping the microphone ahead. The ambient sounds were there, but beneath them he detected faint, erratic patterns. Subharmonics layered beneath the insect buzz, fleeting high-frequency chirps that vanished as soon as he tried to focus on them. The swamp wasn't silent, it was recalibrating. Javi stumbled, his injured leg buckling. Ronan barely caught him before he fell. The guide's face was slick with sweat, his skin worryingly pale. "Ronan, I cannot. Much longer," he gasped, leaning heavily against Ronan. "Just a little further, Javi," Ronan lied, seeing no end to the oppressive green tunnel ahead. "There has to be somewhere we can rest, regroup." As if summoned by his words, a new sound began, subtle at first. A low, rhythmic beat like a distant drum. Thump, thump, thump. It seemed to emanate from the ground beneath them, steady and hypnotic. Maya stopped, tilting her head. She placed her small hand flat on the muddy earth, her expression intent. "What is it?" Ronan asked, straining his ears. The drumming was growing louder, more insistent. Maya looked up, her eyes wide with alarm. She shook her head, then pointed emphatically down at the ground, then made a rapid crumbling motion with her fingers. "The ground?" Ronan questioned. "Unstable." He stamped his boot cautiously. The ridge felt solid enough here, packed earth and root systems. The drumming intensified, becoming a powerful, driving rhythm that resonated in Ronan's chest. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't just sound, it was vibration. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble slightly. Then another layer of sound joined the drumming, a high-pitched, grating noise, like rock scraping against rock coming from ahead, deeper along the path. Maya frantically opened her sketchbook, charcoal flying across the page. She drew the ridge path, then drew deep fissures cracking open across it, radiating outwards from a point just ahead of them. She added jagged lines depicting the scraping sound originating from these fissures. Cave-in, sinkhole, Ronan guessed, looking ahead. The path seemed intact. Was the sound an illusion or a warning? The resonant mass behind them seemed to respond to the new sounds. Its hum deepened, synchronizing with the drumming rhythm. The clicking of the mockers became faster, agitated. It increased its speed, sliding forward with renewed urgency. They were caught, the pursuing mass behind, an unknown sonic hazard ahead signaling collapsing ground. We have to risk it, Ronan decided grimly. Move Javi now. He practically dragged Javi forward, away from the advancing mass, towards the source of the scraping sounds and the ominous drumming. Maya hesitated for only a second before darting ahead again, her eyes scanning the path for the cracks she had drawn. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, seeming to come from the very air around them now, disorienting, painful. The ground vibrated more intensely with each thump of the subterranean drum beat. Ronan felt grit shift beneath his boots. Suddenly, Maya stopped, holding up her hand. She pointed to a section of the path just ahead. To Ronan's eyes, it looked no different from the rest of the ridge. But Maya shook her head vehemently, drawing a large X in the air over that spot. The scraping sound seemed to coalesce directly over that section of path. Ronan aimed the microphone. The input signal was a chaotic mess of low-frequency drumming and high-frequency screeching. It wasn't just sound. It felt like the air itself was tearing. He trusted the child's perception over his own confused senses. This way. He pulled Javi sharply to the left, forcing them off the main path into a dense thicket of ferns and sharp-edged reeds bordering the ridge. Seconds after they veered off, the section of path Maya had indicated collapsed inwards with a deafening roar. Earth, roots, and mud cascaded down into a newly opened chasm, at least 10 feet deep, revealing churning black water below. The drumming and scraping sounds abruptly ceased, replaced by the sucking gurgle of the sinkhole. If they had continued straight, they would have plunged directly into it. The swamp had used focused sound not just to mimic, but to create or trigger a physical trap. Ronan stared at the chasm, his heart pounding. He looked at Maya, who leaned against a tree trunk, breathing heavily, her small face pale but resolute. Her intuition, her connection to this place's twisted signals, had saved them. Their relief was short-lived. The resonant mass, momentarily blocked by the sinkhole, paused at the edge. The humming deepened again. Then, with a grotesque sucking sound, it began to extend pseudopods of mud and root across the chasm, forming a makeshift bridge. Mockers skittered across the forming structure, testing its stability. It wouldn't be stopped for long. "We can't go back," Ronan stated unnecessarily. They pushed deeper into the dense undergrowth, leaving the ridge path entirely, forcing their way through the thick vegetation parallel to the chasm. The going was incredibly slow, thorns and sharp leaves tearing at them. Javi stumbled again, letting out a sharp cry of pain. Ronan helped him sit on a large, moss-covered root. Javi's injured leg was bleeding more freely now, the torn flesh looking inflamed, angry. A darker network of lines, like bruised veins, seemed to be spreading outwards from the gouges left by the banyan roots. "The wound," Javi muttered, his voice faint. "It burns." He touched the spreading discoloration, his fingers trembling. "Feels cold inside." Ronan examined the leg, his stomach churning. It looked bad. Infected, certainly, but the discoloration was unnatural, unhealthy. Like the swamp itself was seeping into him. He ripped strips from his own shirt, making crude bandages, trying to clean the wound with the last of their drinking water. It was a futile gesture, he suspected. As Ronan worked, a new sound began. Soft, insidious. Not a mimicry of a known voice this time, but a sibilant chorus of whispers, seeming to come from all directions at once, just at the edge of hearing. They weren't distinct words, more like the suggestion of words, weaving in and out of the insect hum and dripping water. "Give up, so tired, rest now, becomes easier, part of the green." Ronan shook his head, trying to clear the sounds. "Do you hear that, Javi?" Javi's eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow. "Here, Sophia," he murmured deliriously. "She's waiting, in the quiet." The whispers intensified, swirling around them. "Let go, sleep, join the chorus, no more pain." Ronan felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion wash over him, a profound desire to simply lie down in the mud, to close his eyes, to let the green silence take him. His movements became sluggish. The whispers promised peace, an end to the struggle. It felt tempting. He looked at Maya. She stood rigidly, her hands clamped over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut tight. She was resisting, but it was clearly affecting her too. This was different. Not a lure, not a shock tactic. This was a direct psychic assault, a sonic sedative designed to make them give up. Ronan fought against the unnatural lethargy. He grabbed his recorder, fumbling with the controls with clumsy fingers. He needed a counter-frequency, something disruptive. He scrolled through his limited sound files. The high-frequency tone again, maybe too predictable. He stopped on another file, a recording he'd made years ago in a steel foundry, a chaotic industrial soundscape of crashing metal, roaring furnaces, grinding machinery. Pure, ugly noise. He jammed the headphones back on, directing the microphone away from them towards the swamp. He hit play, cranking the volume. The roar of the foundry recording blasted into the quiet undergrowth. The sound of heavy industry, of human chaos, crashed against the insidious whispers. The effect was jarring, brutal. The whispers faltered, overwhelmed by the sheer volume and dissonance. The heavy lethargy pressing down on Ronan lessened, replaced by the familiar jangle of adrenaline. Javi startled, his eyes flying open, the delirium momentarily broken by the shock of the industrial noise. Maya uncovered her ears, looking confused but no longer under the spell of the whispers. But the swamp reacted instantly to this new intrusion. The foundry recording was abruptly absorbed, distorted. The crashing metal sounds twisted, morphing into the rhythmic clank-clank-clank of heavy chains being dragged through mud. The roar of the furnace warped into a deep, bubbling growl. The grinding machinery became the sound of immense jaws chewing, splintering bone. The swamp wasn't just blocking the sound. It was consuming it, twisting it into something even more terrifying, broadcasting it back at them amplified. The clanking chains sounded close. The chewing sound seemed to come from just behind the nearest screen of vines. The bubbling growl vibrated the air. Ronan ripped the headphones off, switching off the recorder. Using external sounds against the swamp was backfiring, giving it new ammunition. Suddenly, Maya screamed a raw, genuine sound of terror, unlike her previous whimpers. She pointed, not at the source of the twisted industrial sounds, but down at Javi's injured leg. Ronan looked. The dark, vein-like discoloration spreading from the wounds was no longer static. It was moving. Fine, dark tendrils like living threads beneath the skin were visibly wriggling, slowly extending further up Javi's leg. The flesh around them seemed to pulse faintly in time with the distant hum of the resonant mass, which, having bridged the chasm, was now pushing through the undergrowth towards their position, guided by the noise. Javi stared down at his own leg in horror, emitting a choked, gagging sound. The swamp wasn't just outside them anymore. It was inside him, growing. Chapter 7: The Symbiotic Strain. Horror, cold and visceral, seized Ronan. He stared, momentarily paralyzed, at the writhing darkness beneath the skin of Javi's leg. Thin, black filaments, like ink injected into capillaries, pulsed with a sickening, independent life, inching their way upwards from the ragged, discolored wounds. They moved with a slow, deliberate crawl, burrowing deeper into the muscle tissue, leaving inflamed trails in their wake. Javi made a choked, gagging sound, clawing at his own leg with dirt-caked fingernails. "Get it out!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with terror and agony. "Ronan, cut it out now!" "Don't!" Ronan grabbed Javi's wrists, pulling his hands away from the rapidly spreading infestation. "You'll make it worse. Spread it faster." He didn't know if that was true, but instinct screamed against opening the flesh further to whatever parasitic horror this was. Behind them, the undergrowth crashed and splintered. The deep hum of the resonant mass intensified, punctuated by the sharp, eager clicking of hundreds of Mire Mockers. It was close, pushing through the final barrier of vegetation, drawn by their sounds, their scent, their fear. Maya tugged urgently at Ronan's arm, her eyes wide with panic, pointing desperately towards a dense wall of hanging vines and aerial roots to their left. It looked impenetrable, another dead end. But she stabbed her finger towards it repeatedly, her small face conveying a desperate certainty. A way through, or just away from the mass. Ronan looked from Maya's insistent gesture to Javi's rapidly deteriorating state, then glanced back towards the imminent arrival of the mass. Javi wouldn't survive a direct encounter. They had seconds. "Okay, Maya, okay," Ronan made the choice. He hauled Javi upright again. The guide screamed as weight fell on his corrupted leg, the tendrils beneath the skin seeming to writhe in response to the pressure. "Lean on me, Javi, we go now." Supporting Javi, Ronan plunged towards the wall of vines Maya indicated. He used the machete, hacking blindly at the thick, rubbery curtains of vegetation. Progress was brutally slow. Vines tangled around the blade, resisting the cuts. The resonant mass broke through into the small, crowded space they occupied. It loomed over them, a grotesque wall of mud, slime, and chattering mockers, blotting out the already dim light. The subsonic hum battered Ronan's senses, making his vision swim. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and stagnant water. The twisted industrial sounds returned, blasting from the mass, the clang of chains, the roar of furnaces, the crunch of bone, a deafening, chaotic assault designed to overwhelm. Mockers near the surface of the mass extended root-like tendrils, reaching, probing. Ronan hacked with renewed desperation at the vines. Behind the first layer, he saw it not a cave, but a narrow fissure between two colossal, ancient mangrove trunks fused together at the base, draped and hidden by the curtain of aerial roots. It was barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. In here, Ronan yelled over the din, pushing Javi towards the opening. Maya, go! Maya scrambled through the narrow gap without hesitation. Javi stumbled after her, crying out as his injured leg scraped against the rough bark. Ronan turned, facing the mass for a split second. A mocker-laden pseudopod surged forward, reaching for him. He threw himself backwards through the fissure, pulling the curtain of vines closed just as the muddy tendril slammed against the outside. They were inside. The space was incredibly tight, a narrow, high-ceilinged crevice between the two ancient trees. Roots snaked across the floor and walls, creating an uneven, claustrophobic chamber perhaps 10 feet long and only 3 feet wide. It smelled of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else. A faint, coppery scent like old blood. Water trickled down the rough bark walls, pooling slightly on the uneven floor. The noise from the resonant mass outside was muffled but still terribly present. The deep hum vibrated through the wood, through the very air in the cramped space. They could hear the wet, sucking sounds of its movement, the frantic clicking of mockers just beyond the vine curtain, sounds of probing, scraping against the tree bark. Ronan leaned back against the rough wall, chest heaving, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. He shone his small flashlight around the confined space. Maya was huddled at the far end, her sketchbook clutched tight. Javi lay slumped on the floor, groaning, cradling his leg. Ronan knelt beside Javi, shining the light on the injury. The black tendrils had spread further, reaching his knee now, the network visibly denser beneath the skin. The flesh around them was hot to the touch, swollen and purplish. Javi's breathing was shallow, his eyes clouded with pain and fever. Ronan, Javi whispered, his voice thin, reedy. It hurts, but it feels quiet now. Quiet, Ronan frowned. The mass was still humming and clicking right outside. In my head, Javi clarified, a strange calmness entering his voice. The other voices, Sophia, the crying, gone, just the green singing. He smiled weakly, a disturbing sight on his pain-racked face. It wants to connect. Ronan felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with the damp air. The parasitic growth wasn't just consuming Javi's flesh. It was interfacing with his mind, filtering his perception, feeding him the swamp's own propaganda. The singing Javi heard was likely the same insidious influence that had whispered promises of rest earlier. Outside, the scraping sounds intensified. The mass was trying to find a way in, or perhaps widen the fissure. A thick, Root-like tendril suddenly punched through the vine curtain near the top of the opening, writhing like a blind snake, exploring the interior space. Ronan instinctively flinched back, pulling Javi further into the crevice. Maya stifled a cry. The tendril probed the air, retracting slightly before whipping sideways, slapping wetly against the bark wall near Maya. It seemed to be sensing, searching. Ronan needed to distract it, drive it back. He shone his flashlight beam directly at the probing tendril. It recoiled slightly from the direct light. He then aimed the beam at the floor near the entrance, illuminating the pools of trickling water. An idea sparked. He still had his audio equipment, battered but functional. Sound was dangerous, but maybe controlled sound, focused sound. He rummaged in his recorder bag, pulling out a small, waterproof contact microphone, designed to pick up vibrations directly from surfaces. He also found a small, portable amplifier speaker unit he sometimes used for playback in the field. It ran on batteries. He quickly plugged the contact mic into the amplifier's input, and the amplifier's output into its own small speaker. He cranked the gain, creating a potential feedback loop if the mic picked up the speaker's output. He cautiously approached the entrance, staying low. The main tendril had withdrawn momentarily, but smaller probing roots still tested the edges of the fissure. Outside, the humming and clicking continued unabated. Ronan carefully placed the contact microphone against the inside of the massive tree trunk, right next to the fissure opening. He held the small speaker unit in his hand, aimed towards the mic. He took a breath and switched the amplifier on. A high-pitched squeal erupted, much louder and more focused than the earlier sine wave, contained and amplified by the narrow space and the direct contact with the wood. It wasn't just airborne sound. The vibration traveled directly through the tree trunk itself. Outside, the reaction was immediate. A deafening screech tore through the air, a sound of myriad voices, mockers, distorted mimicries, raw noise, blended into a cacophony of agony or rage. The humming abruptly stopped. The clicking became chaotic, panicked. Heavy, wet thuds sounded against the outside of the tree trunk as parts of the mass seemed to spasm or detach. Ronan quickly switched off the amplifier before the feedback loop could damage his equipment or draw further unwanted attention. The sudden silence outside was profound, broken only by the dripping water inside the fissure and Javi's low moans. Had he driven it away, or just angered it further? He risked peering through a gap in the vines. The resonant mass was still there, but it had pulled back slightly from the fissure entrance. Its surface undulated violently. Several large chunks, composed of mud and screaming mockers, had slewed off and lay twitching on the ground. The main body seemed contracted, defensively postured. The direct vibration through the wood had apparently been incredibly disruptive or painful to its structure. A temporary victory, perhaps, but as the silence stretched, Ronan became aware of other sounds within their cramped refuge, the drip of water, their own ragged breathing, and something else. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound, not from outside, from inside the fissure. He scanned the narrow space with his flashlight. The beam landed on the far end beyond Maya. Etched into the dark, damp wood of the tree trunk were markings, scratches, dozens of them, tally marks grouped in fives. Beneath them, crudely carved letters barely legible. DY17, SINGS, CANTSLEEP. DY24, LEGGONE, STILLSINGS. DY, FEEDTHEROOTS. Ronan's blood ran cold. They weren't the first to find this hiding place. Someone else had been trapped here. Someone else who heard the singing. Someone whose leg was gone. Someone who eventually fed the roots. He shone the light on the floor beneath the carvings. The coppery smell was stronger here. Dark stains soaked into the damp earth and wood debris. And nestled amongst the roots covering the floor, almost hidden, lay a small, corroded metal object. A boot buckle, empty. Maya saw the carvings too. She looked from the words to Javi's leg, then back to the carvings, her eyes filled with dawning horror. She opened her sketchbook and flipped frantically through the pages until she found an earlier drawing, one showing the banyan grove effigies. She pointed at one specific effigy, then pointed towards Javi. It was the figure Ronan had noticed earlier, the one that vaguely resembled Javi. Had the previous occupant of this fissure become one of the groaning figures woven into the banyan roots? A low groan pulled Ronan's attention back to Javi. The guide's eyes were open, but they stared blankly upwards, reflecting the flashlight beam like glass. The black tendrils had now reached his thigh, pulsing visibly beneath the torn fabric of his trousers. His skin had taken on a sickly, translucent pallor. "It connects," Javi whispered, his voice unnervingly serene. "The roots, they drink the pain, offer peace." He lifted a trembling hand not towards his leg but towards the rough bark wall of the fissure. "She is here, waiting, inside the wood." Ronan realized with dawning dread that the singing Javi heard wasn't just a general broadcast from the swamp. It was localized, concentrated, perhaps emanating from the ancient, fused trees that formed their supposed sanctuary. The previous occupant hadn't just hidden here. They had been communing with and ultimately consumed by the trees themselves. The fissure wasn't a refuge. It was a feeding chamber. Outside, a new sound began. A low, slow scraping as if something immense were dragging itself across the bark. Not the sound of the mass trying to get in. This was different, slower, more deliberate. It was coming from above. Something descending the exterior of the massive tree trunks towards their fissure. Chapter 8, Roots Take Hold. The slow, heavy scraping sound from above grew louder, closer. Dust and small fragments of bark rained down from the roof of the narrow fissure. Ronan aimed his flashlight beam upwards, tracking the sound's origin. A thick, pale root, wider than Ronan's thigh, was descending into the cramped space from an unseen opening high above. It wasn't like the mobile, rope-like roots of the Resonant Mass. This was denser, woodier, moving with a slow, grinding certainty. It looked like a living pillar being lowered into their tomb. Fine, hair-like filaments coated its surface, twitching, sensing the air. Ronan instinctively backed away, pulling Maya with him, pressing against the damp wall near the crude carvings left by the fissure's previous victim. His heart hammered against his ribs. Javi groaned again, a low, guttural sound. He pushed himself slowly into a sitting position, his movements jerky, unnatural. His eyes, reflecting the flashlight beam, were wide and unfocused, pupils dilated. The black, writhing tendrils had now visibly reached his stomach, disappearing beneath his mud-caked shirt. A faint tremor ran constantly through his body. "It is time," Javi whispered, his voice a dry rustle devoid of his earlier warmth or fear. It sounded like leaves skittering on stone. "The wood groans, it thirsts." He turned his head slowly, not towards Ronan or Maya, but towards the descending pillar root. A look of profound longing, of rapturous understanding, smoothed the pain from his features. "She waits. We feed the roots. Become part of the song." "Javi, snap out of it," Ronan shouted, shaking his shoulder uselessly. Javi's flesh felt cold, clammy beneath the thin fabric. The guy didn't react, his attention utterly fixed on the descending root. The root touched the floor of the fissure with a soft thud, sending vibrations through the ground. It stopped its descent, remaining still for a moment, the fine filaments on its surface twitching more rapidly. It pulsed faintly, emitting a low, resonant thrum that seemed to harmonize with Javi's own body tremors. Ronan felt trapped. The main fissure entrance was still blocked by the presence of the resonant mass, its muffled hum and occasional scraping sounds a constant reminder of the threat outside. Now, this massive root blocked any potential ascent, and Javi was lost. Javi began to move again, slowly, deliberately, dragging his corrupted leg. He wasn't moving away from the root. He was moving towards it, his arms outstretched as if to embrace it. "Peace," he murmured. "Quiet green." Then his head snapped towards Maya. His unfocused eyes seemed to fix on her for the first time since his transformation began. A new expression dawned on his face, not recognition, but hunger, a predatory assessment. "The thirst," Javi rasped, changing direction, lurching towards the terrified child huddled against the wall. "A small offering quickens the joining." "No," Ronan shoved himself between Javi and Maya. He grabbed the front of Javi's shirt. "Javi, fight it, this isn't you." Javi looked at Ronan, his eyes clearing for a fleeting, horrifying second. A flicker of the man he was surfaced, filled with terror and confusion. "Ronan, it sings. Make it stop." Then the clarity vanished, replaced by the placid emptiness of the swamp's thrall. He shoved Ronan hard, sending him stumbling back against the opposite wall. Javi's strength was unnatural, feverish. Javi reached for Maya again, his fingers crooked into claws. Maya screamed, scrambling backwards along the wall, deeper into the narrowest part of the fissure near the carvings. Ronan lunged, tackling Javi around the waist. They crashed to the floor, Ronan landing heavily on top. Javi thrashed beneath him with surprising force, groaning, snapping his teeth. The black tendrils beneath his skin pulsed violently. Ronan struggled to pin his arms. It was like wrestling a man possessed, driven by something beyond normal endurance. As they struggled, the massive pillar root on the floor began to move again. It didn't rise or lower. It began to rotate, scraping against the floor, grinding towards the sounds of their fight. The fine filaments on its surface extended, reaching like questing tendrils towards Ronan and the thrashing Javi. Ronan saw the filaments brushing against Javi's corrupted leg. Where they made contact, The black tendrils within Javi seemed to surge, darkening, thickening. Javi let out a long, shuddering sigh, his struggles weakening, a look of ecstatic release spreading across his face. The root wasn't just sensing, it was connecting, feeding, accelerating the assimilation. Ronan knew he couldn't hold Javi for long and the root was closing in. He looked desperately around the cramped space. His flashlight beam swept across the floor, illuminating the discarded contact microphone and the small amplifier unit near the main entrance. An idea, desperate and dangerous, formed. He shoved Javi away with all his strength, rolling clear just as the rotating root scraped against the space where he'd been. He scrambled towards the audio equipment. "Maya," he yelled. "The mic, the tree, touch the big root with the metal end." He snatched up the amplifier, checking the battery light still green. He fumbled with the input jack, plugging the contact mic cable back in. He saw Maya hesitate, looking from the terrifying root to Ronan, then down at the contact mic lying near her feet. She understood. She snatched up the small metal microphone. Javi, momentarily forgotten by the root as Ronan moved, staggered to his feet. He ignored Ronan now, turning back towards Maya with that predatory focus. He lurched towards her, blocking her path to the main root. The pillar root continued its slow rotation, grinding closer to Javi. Filaments reached, brushing his clothes, his skin. Ronan saw Maya trapped between Javi and the wall. He saw the root nearing Javi. He saw the amplifier in his own hand. He switched it on, twisting the gain dial to maximum. He didn't aim the speaker at the root. He didn't have time. He lunged towards Javi, who was reaching for Maya, and slammed the small, vibrating speaker unit directly against the pulsing black network visible on Javi's thigh. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. A piercing shriek erupted, not from the amplifier but from Javi. It was a sound of pure, amplified agony, mixed with the high-frequency feedback generated by the amplifier now essentially using Javi's corrupted flesh as part of the circuit via the root's connection. The black tendrils beneath his skin convulsed violently, charring, burning from the focused sonic energy. Javi arched backwards, his body rigid, smoke or steam rising from his leg. The placid expression vanished, replaced by ultimate agony. The massive pillar root reacted instantly to the localized assault on its connection point. It stopped rotating. It let out a deep, groaning vibration that shook the entire fissure. The fine filaments retracted as if burned. It began to slowly, ponderously ascend, pulling away from the source of the pain, grinding its way back up towards the fissure roof. Javi collapsed to the floor, twitching, silent now, the smell of burned flesh filling the air. The tendrils beneath his skin were still, blackened, dead. Whether Javi himself was alive or dead, Ronan couldn't tell. Maya, seeing her chance as the root ascended and Javi fell, darted forward. She ran not towards Ronan, but towards the ascending root itself. Just before it lifted completely clear of the floor, she slammed the metal contact microphone against its rough, woody surface. Ronan, still holding the active amplifier connected to the mic, felt a massive jolt, an energy feedback that wasn't just sound. The amplifier sparked, hissed, and died in his hand. Simultaneously, the ascending root spasmed violently, emitting another deep, groaning shudder that cracked the very walls of the fissure. Small rocks and debris rained down. Then silence. The root continued its slow ascent, disappearing back into the darkness above. Javi lay still on the floor. The amplifier in Ronan's hand was dead. Outside, the resonant mass, perhaps sensing the trauma within the tree, or perhaps detecting the final silence from Javi, renewed its efforts. Heavy, thudding impacts slammed against the vine curtain covering the entrance. Scraping sounds intensified. It was trying to breach the fissure again, sensing weakened prey. Ronan rushed to Maya's side. "Are you okay?" She nodded, pale but unharmed, dropping the now useless contact microphone. She pointed towards the main entrance, where the vine curtain bulged inwards with each impact from the mass. Then she pointed towards the far end of the fissure, past Javi's body, near the carvings. Ronan followed her gesture with his flashlight beam. A new crack, narrow but distinct, had opened in the tree wall near the floor, caused by the root's violent, amplified spasm. It wasn't large, but it might be just wide enough. The vine curtain at the entrance ripped open. Mud, roots, and chattering mockers began to pour into the fissure. The deep hum of the mass flooded the space. "Go, Maya, go!" Ronan pushed her towards the new crack. He spared one last look at Javi's still form, a leaden weight settling in his chest. He couldn't help him now. He snatched up his damaged recorder bag, evidence perhaps if they survived. Maya squeezed through the narrow crack in the wood. Ronan pushed himself through after her, the rough edges tearing at his clothes, scraping his skin. He glanced back through the crack just before pulling himself completely free. The resonant mass was flowing into the fissure, surrounding Javi's body, the mockers swarming over him, absorbing him back into the swamp's substance. Ronan emerged on the other side, finding himself not in open swamp, but in another narrow space, a cramped tunnel formed by the massive, interwoven root systems of the ancient mangroves. It was dark, damp, and branching. Maya stood waiting, looking back and forth between the potential paths. Behind them, the sounds from the fissure faded slightly as the mass presumably filled it. They were out of the immediate trap, but they were deeper in the swamp than ever, lost within its root-bound underbelly, with damaged equipment, no guide, and the certain knowledge that the entire ecosystem was sentient, hostile, and aware of their continued presence. Ronan leaned against a root wall, breathing heavily. The image of Javi's final moments burned into his mind. He looked at Maya, the small, silent child who had navigated them through horrors he could barely comprehend. They were alive for now, but the swamp stretched endlessly around them, whispering, watching, waiting. The escape from the fissure wasn't an end. It was just a transition to a different level of the nightmare. The end.